Yes, real estate.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm going to let Matt tell his story, but I just wanted to show the world this show is specifically designed to show people like ourselves that come up from crisis backgrounds and where we're at today in our life and what we're doing with our lives today. So, welcome to the show again, Matt. You can take it from there, brother. Good to see you.
You want to just kind of give you an overview of what happened within my crime, like?
Yeah, you have such a great story. I'd love for them to have the anchor of the story, the beginning of it, and then where you ultimately developed into that which you are today,
Okay.
which is an amazing host, the Inside True Crime podcast. I'm catching every one of them now, by the way, Matt. I absolutely love your show, man.
Yeah, I was gonna say I appreciate that. It's funny, you know, we'll have a good few months and then a good bad months, but even our bad months now, I was complaining the other day to my producer. I was like, man, the numbers are down, and he took a screenshot of the analytics from a year ago and showed them
Yeah,
to me, and he's like, are they better than these? Because this was a year ago at this time, and I was like, and it was like, well, you're right. It's just we're killing it compared to a year ago. And he's, so every once in a while I have to have somebody put me in perspective. I get
yeah,
greedy and I don't realize how well we're doing. And somebody
yeah,
has to say, you're doing pretty good. Like your bad month right now is better than your best month all last year.
yeah. Funny
So
how that goes.
I know, I get to be a jerk sometimes and forget about how lucky I am. So my story basically starts with me. I grew up in Tampa, Florida, and I was a mortgage broker. So I have a learning disability. I have dyslexia, and I went to schools for kids with learning disabilities. And I ended up graduating college with a degree in fine arts, which is pretty much useless. And I got a BA from the University of South Florida. Uh, Worked in construction. Well, I actually worked as an insurance adjuster for like a year or so. Really couldn't keep up with the workload. Then I worked in construction for another year or so. Then a girlfriend of mine convinced me to start working as a mortgage broker. So I started working as a mortgage broker. And by the time I got my license and was working for someone,
Mhm.
my credit cards were maxed out. I was behind on my mortgage. I was behind on my car payment because I was switching from every time I did a job, I got a check. So I was getting
Yeah,
a check, whatever, every couple of days or once a week, twice a week sometimes. And then I went into a job field that is essentially commission only. So that took 30, 45 days before you get a check. And I had to take the class. I had to study for a weekend to take the class. Then I had to take the actual test for the state. Then I had to go up for training for a week. Then I had to come back and try and rustle up clients. Then I had to start the process of closing their loan. So even if you had a couple of deals the first day, which doesn't happen,
yeah,
it's month and a half away before you're closing these loans. So I was really behind by the time my first loan was ready to be sent off to underwriting. And I remember I gave the file to my manager, and she looked at it and she kind of slowly flipped through the file, and she pulled one loan out, or one piece of paper out of the whole pile of papers, and she set it aside, and she said, this looks perfect. Everything looks great. She said, except for this one document, which was a verification of rent. And she said, your client's been 30 days late on her mortgage in the last 2 years.
uh-huh.
Well, you can't be 30 days late on your mortgage, or I'm sorry, on your rent. It was a rent, 30 days late on your rent. And so that was a deal killer. Like that was the bank doesn't want to lend that person money. This person's 30 days late. They
Yeah,
don't pay their bills on time. So, and she already had questionable credit. So I was like, oh, wow. And I just remember thinking, that's it. I'm like, this loan had to close. Like I
yeah,
was just so far behind on everything. I was hiding my car from Ford Motor Credit. And so I said, what should I do? Even though I remember thinking there was nothing I could do. I don't even know why. I just naturally I was like, oh my God, well, what should I do? Just
yeah,
desperate. Like there's
yeah,
nothing you're done.
yeah.
She pulled out a whiteout bottle and shook it up. And she said, if I was you, She goes, I'd white it out, make a copy of it, and stick it in the file, send it in. She goes, underwriting will never catch it.
Wow.
And I was like,
welcome to the system.
Right. And I was just, I'd never broken the law. I'd never done anything wrong. I'd gotten a couple of traffic tickets.
Yeah.
And
Interesting.
so I whited it out, stuck it in the file, sent it off to underwriting, extremely freaked out for the next few days. And then underwriting called me and said, hey, we're ready to close.
Wow.
Closed a couple days later. I got a check for like $3,500. I was absolutely thrilled. Next person that walked in, they had an issue with the W-2. They didn't make quite enough money. I changed the numbers, stuck it in the file. That closed. Next person had a problem with their W-2. Next person had a problem with their rent. Next person had a problem with a bank statement. But very quickly, like anybody that walked in, if there was a problem I could fix, I did fix it. Yeah. And I used to say, that if you walked in that office with a pulse, I was going to get you a loan.
And Matt's off to the races.
So I worked for that company for maybe 6 months. Then I started my own company. I hired 12 guys and we were committing fraud. And, the fraud we were committing, although the number amount is semi-large, is probably low. I always say about 40 million. That's just because what the FBI said. It was probably more than that. And I think theirs was just kind of a basic estimate. But that wasn't money that we were making. Like people think you did a $1 million, you have $1 million fraud charge. Well, if I got the bank to lend you $1 million and you bought a house with it, I made a broker fee.
Yeah.
People are like, oh, you made $1 million. I didn't make $1 million. That was just a bad loan. But the way the government adds it up, they'll say, oh, you did 40, 50, $60 million worth of bad loans. And you're like, I made some broker fees like that. I didn't get that money. Like, what are you talking about? So it's misleading. But my mortgage company basically did about 40 million in bad loans over a few years. And we got caught a few times, well, several times. And I would talk my way out of it. And at some point, I ended up getting in trouble. A friend of mine, a mortgage broker that worked for me, she went and started her own company, her own brokerage business with her husband. And we were all friends. Like I was happy for them. And like this is a woman that, we went to Puerto Rico together. We vacationed together. We watched each other's kids. She started her own business and she ran what's called a straw man scam for a client. And that's when basically how, let's say you decide to, somebody comes to you and says, listen, I'm selling a house for $400,000, but I can get it appraised at $600,000. So you go get a loan from the bank for $600,000, and then I'll give you, whatever, $100,000 or $150,000 or $100,000 to buy the house, and I'll get I'll sell my house and get $100,000. We'll split the difference, whatever it is. And then of course you guys make a few payments. You let it go into foreclosure. You made $100,000. So she has some clients that were doing this. They were getting people to buy. They're finding real estate that they could buy for $300,000 or $400,000, get appraised for $600,000 or $700,000. They would pull money out, make a few payments, let them go into foreclosure. They did that for 4 or 5 houses. They stopped paying. The banks investigated. The FBI came in. They raided her office. She cooperated against them. She cooperated, and she and her husband wore a wire on me, and they basically, when the FBI came in and grabbed them, they said, well, I know somebody who's got a whole bunch of people working out of his office committing fraud.
Yeah, fancy that, huh?
Right. So they invite me we go to lunch. During lunch, they mentioned my wife, who I'd done a bunch of bad loans for, a bunch of fraudulent loans for, but I closed at their place. Mm-hmm. This was my first wife. So while they're saying, listen, the FBI is asking questions about your wife, I immediately bury myself. I'm like, oh my gosh, you didn't tell them the W-2s were fake, did you? You didn't tell them we were married, did you? You didn't I just bury myself.
Yeah.
So basically I realize what's going on. I tell her, listen, just tell the FBI to call me. Because I realized during the whole process, they're wired. Yeah. It becomes pretty obvious. So
it becomes very obvious once you start tuning into that kind of thing. I've had it done to me. I get it.
Yeah. So,
yeah.
so, you know, of course, I also knew by the time I figured it out, I realized what I'd said.
Yeah, you're buried. You're done.
So I just I was like, yeah, just tell the FBI to call me. Like,
yeah.
So they called me. I get a lawyer. Give the lawyer $75,000. I agree to plead guilty. At that point, I plead guilty. So I plead guilty. I get 3 years probation, but I lose my mortgage license and I can't run my business anymore. Yeah. It's funny because the FBI, or sorry, my attorney wanted me to. He was saying I hadn't been indicted yet, and he was saying, look, if you just go get a bunch of the files from your company, from your mortgage brokers, bring them to the FBI and cooperate with the FBI, I can keep you from being indicted. We can do what's called a pretrial intervention. And I was like, yeah, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. Right. Like I thought I was a tough guy or something. And I was like, plead guilty, not realizing I'm thinking I'm not going to say anything because these guys are friends of mine. And, but the truth is nobody was a friend of mine. And in the moment I got in trouble, the second time, these guys line up to cooperate.
Oh, they all roll over, of course.
Right. Yeah. So if I knew then what I know now, I would have walked into the Friday meeting. We have like a Friday sales meeting with a dolly and picked up a file cabinet and said, you guys are probably going to be contacted by the FBI.
Yeah.
I get an attorney if I was you, and just walked right out of the place with it. But
That's
I didn't.
Hilarious.
I took 3 years. I got probation, and also had this jackass attorney. He was trying to convince me that you could go to jail. I was like, I haven't lost it. There's no money loss. Yeah. Like, what are you talking about? Like, even I realized, they try and scare you to pay them their fee, and then they're gonna keep you out of prison. They're gonna do everything they can. But the truth is, once you're locked up, then you have a chance to kind of do a little law work. You realize I was never facing prison.
Yeah.
Like, you're trying to tell me, this guy's trying to convince me that I'm going to prison, but he's going to do everything he can to save me, give me $75,000. I give him $75,000. And then once you go to prison, I went to prison years later and was able to do law work. I realized I was never facing prison. And
who's the real racketeer?
Right. So anyway, so now I was on probation. And I decided that by this point, I'm getting a divorce, and
of course,
I basically lost everything I had.
Absolutely.
While I had been, fraudulently committing fraud, and we had like 50 something rental units, some nice houses. And I, of course, my ex-wife got all that. I gave her, I forget what I gave her, 100,000. I was paying her like $2,000 a month in child support. So I'm going under.
Yeah.
So what I decided to do, because I'm not really at that time, I didn't have any other skills. Like, I could maybe sell cars.
Yeah.
That's probably it. Like, I didn't know anything else to do other than work in the financial industry, and I wasn't really allowed to do that anymore.
Oh, can't imagine why.
Right. So what I decided to do was to commit a much larger fraud. And what I did was I convinced Social Security to issue me Social Security numbers to children that don't exist. So I created a fake birth certificate, a fake shot record. I go into Social Security, tell them that I have a child that was born 10 months ago, and I needed a Social Security number issued. And so they would look it up on the computer, and they'd say, oh, wow, you're right, because they have a birth certificate.
Right.
They look it up and they're like, yeah, I can't find this kid. You're right. Oh, I did have, wow. Okay. So they put them in the system. They issue me a Social Security number. I then would go out and I would apply for credit cards. I get turned down, but I'd get approved for secured credit cards. You pay $500 or $1,000.
Right.
So I do that, and I start creating fake credit profiles. And after about 6 months, I would have credit scores of about 700, right? 695, 705, 710, whatever.
Yeah.
At that time, to get a loan from the bank, you needed a 620 credit score. And these guys have 700. You needed, of course, you need to be on your job over 2 years. You need to be have be able to prove residency over 2 years, and you needed a 5% down payment, or you needed to own the property to refinance it. Well, of course, I could make the W-2s and pay stubs. I could make canceled checks to make it look like you'd been in the same place or paying your rent for 2 years. I also owned a property management company, which I could verify your employment. By that point, I was actually creating fake banks online. I was going online and I'd create a website for a fake bank. So you could go online and pull it up and it looked like SunTrust Bank. You could flip through it. You could call somebody at the bank. You could leave there's a whole thing, just like a bank website.
Yeah, you got good, didn't you?
Yeah, it just wasn't a real bank website.
Yeah.
And what I decided to do was to start taking these fake the synthetic identities is what they call them now, and we call them phantom borrowers because it wasn't really a thing when I was doing it. This was in 2001. We started doing it, and so I started building these credit profiles, and I would go into Ybor City, which is I woke up at 2:00 this morning to take my wife to. She works for a yacht company. So I had to take her and drop her off at a yacht, and they're now taking the yacht and they're going around Florida for the next 4 days.
That's a damn good reason to be tired, brother.
Yeah. So I'm sorry. I never did go back. She was like, "Oh, you should go back to sleep." Yeah, that didn't happen.
No.
So what happened was I built these credit profiles, and I went into an area of Ybor City, which is a rundown area, but it's kind of revitalized. Pretty much everybody has these areas, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where there's a rundown area, houses are built in 1920s, 30s, 40s, but the whole area is just crap now. But the city's always trying to dump money into them and revitalize it. And, we're changing the area and whatever.
Hey, that's where we dumped all of our Coke dollars back in the 80s and 90s. Exactly that.
Buy them all up and renovate them, sell them, and
damn right, we did a lot of them that way.
It's a great way to launder money.
Oh, was it?
So I started buying these houses in these fake identities names or synthetic identities names. And I would purchase the house for, let's say, $50,000, but I would record the sale at $200,000. You could do this just by paying the extra doc stamps on the deed. So now I'm got a synthetic identity by the name of Lee Black, and he owns 5 properties that he bought for $40,000 and $50,000 a piece, but they're appraising for over $200,000 each. Back then, that was a good price back then. That was, the median house in Florida back then was like $220,000.
Yeah, early 2000s, correct?
Right.
Yeah.
So I did that, and I would then. So now these guys start owning these houses, and then they refinance them.
Yeah.
So I'm buying a house for $40,000. I'm not doing any renovations. Maybe put $10,000 into it, clean up the outside of it, mow the yard, trim the trees, maybe paint the outside. And we would even have the roofs we'd paint sometimes. Jeez. Not even doing it, just paint the roof so it looks like a brand new roof. And then we clean it up, and then we get an appraisal on it. Now, typically an appraiser goes in there, and we would have appraisers go in and they wouldn't take photos of that. They just swap the photos out for other rehabs.
Yeah.
So nobody knows. It looks perfect. From the street, it looks like a perfectly good house, a new rehab, a new house that's been renovated. And I would refinance the house. So I'm buying the house for $50,000. I'm refinancing it, getting a loan from the bank for $190,000.
Jeez,
I've got maybe 50 in it. Yeah. So, $50,000, $60,000 minus, $190 or $180, you're making a profit of $130, $140, $120. Even if it's $100,000, what does it matter? I'm only going to make 4 or 5 payments. So I would do that. Each one of these guys would buy about 5, sometimes 6 houses. So on average, it's 5 houses. They borrow about $1 million, make the payments. And then, of course, they've got perfect credit. So I'm also got, those credit cards that I started with that were $500 and $1,000. Well, now I'm going in and I'm getting a credit card for $20,000, for $25,000, for $15,000. And as your score starts dropping, you go to first, you start with the major credit cards. Then you go to the department. When those start turning you down, you go to the department stores, go to Dillard's, Saks Fifth Avenue. You get a credit card. Then they'll give you a credit card for $3,000. When those stop, you go to the Gap, Home Depot.
Amazing.
To the point where you're getting $500, and then they're just the point back then your credit score dropped so much, they just stopped giving it to you. But by that time, I've got another $100,000 easily. Or I would go into banks and I would get a $15,000 personal loan, but I go to like 4 different banks, or I never did 4. Most I ever did was about 3 banks at the same time for the personal loan, which is set by the Fed. And then I would also go to some of these places like Citigroup, American General was one. I think it went out of business. Household Bank, the little, $5,000, $10,000, $11,000. So you end up making another $150,000 like that. Of course, you got the credit cards. I run up the credit cards, and then you stop paying, and so you get each one of these guys is worth $600,000, $700,000, $800,000.
And none of them's you.
No, none of them is me. And then I just hang.
Brilliant.
And so once the banks start to foreclose and you start getting all of these letters, and of course, I'm not doing this none of this connects to me.
Right.
It's not like they're going to my personal residence. They're going to a residence that this guy bought. So I'm continually checking that residence. And I would just, you don't pay, but eventually you get the collections. And what I would do is I would go and I would take an article out of the newspaper, which, back then newspapers, there was actual newspapers.
Yeah.
And they were printed on something called newsprint. So I would take an article from the newspaper and I would, you pull it offline, but it'd be for like a 12-car pile up on I-75 where someone was life flighted to Tampa General Hospital. And then I would go and I wouldn't retype it. I just copy and paste it, but I'd put in there my synthetic identity's name.
Wow.
He was life flighted to Tampa General Hospital. And then I'd reprint the article on newsprint.
Wow.
You could buy newsprint. You could go to Michael's or Blick or there were so many, their art supply stores. You just buy newsprint. So I'd print it out on the newsprint. Then I'd cut it up. So it's like this, the columns, and I'd put it down on the copy machine, make a copy of it, highlight my guy's name, and then I'd write a letter to the collection companies saying, from my phantom borrower's sister, which obviously doesn't exist either, saying that my brother was in a tragic car accident. He's currently in a coma, and the doctors say that even if he wakes up, he'll never work again.
Wow.
And it gives the collection department they're like, okay, this guy was in an accident.
An action of dismissal.
He's not going to pay. Not his fault. Yeah. They have a reason. It goes in the system, and now they know.
Jesus. Brilliant.
So they don't, everybody used to say, why didn't you if you could make a fake birth certificate, why didn't you make a fake, like a fake death record? I didn't know how that worked. I'm like, I don't know. Are they going to question that? Or what if they go to public records? The guy's still alive. He's just incapacitated. I'm probably good. I did that. And that always worked. They would just foreclose, take the property back, stick it back on the market. I did that to the tune of, I think the government said it was like 11.5 million. I'm not sure if I borrowed 11.5 or they said we made 11.5 because they resold the properties. Either way, that went on for about almost 2 years. And one day, a buddy of mine, what happens is your friends start seeing you making money.
Yeah.
And then they want in on it.
Oh, yeah.
And so you help them out. You think you're helping them out. You tell yourself, I'm going to help them out. I'm a good guy. I'm going to help my buddy out. You're not
mistake.
You're not helping them out.
Yeah, they're not you, brother. They're not the pro. They don't know the system the way you do.
So I have I have a buddy who gets caught in a bank, goes in a bank, gets arrested, immediately cooperates.
Of course.
They set up a task force. They watched me for 3 months while I continue to do this. One day, a friend of mine who's a sheriff's deputy, who I'd probably done $1 million or $2 million for, he and his wife at the time. He's a sheriff deputy. He comes up to me one day at work and he says, Matt, listen, can I talk to you? I'm like, yeah, what's up? Walk outside and he said, I used to date this chick on the Tampa Police Department. And I said, okay. And he goes, she was recently on a task force. And I said, okay. He said, the task force was on you.
Wow.
And the FBI is coming to arrest you in the next couple of days. Is they just handed it over to the FBI because it was a task force, which is made up of counties and state, right? And so they put it all together and realized this is bigger than we can really prosecute. This is federal stuff. This is a bank. This is identity theft bank. So they hand it to the FBI. Well, they already know it's me. The FBI is going to come arrest me.
Yeah, well, it's a multi-agency investigation at that point, and they've got so many different avenues of acquiring information on you. Not to mention all your good friends that you helped out, where that always ends up at some point or another. Been down that road, brother.
Yeah, I mean, I'm done now. I remember he said to me, he said, what are you gonna do? And I went, I mean, I'm leaving, bro. Like, I can't go to prison.
Yeah.
I was like, I'm not gonna go to prison. So I pack up my stuff, I take off, I go to where did I go? Well, first of all, I brought a chick with me. I was dating this girl. I sometimes I sometimes leave this out just because it's a little bit longer. But the quick version is that I was dating this girl for like a month. And she finds out I'm leaving. She begs to come with me. And why I did, it was stupid. I didn't want to be alone. I was concerned. She considered, you're going to need help. And I didn't really need her help.
Yeah.
And which is proof because at some point I ditch her and for a year and a half, I do this completely by myself. Like I didn't need her help.
Yeah.
You're going to need my help and you're going to need help. And I went, okay. So she comes with me. We go to Atlanta. We rent a house. We have no money. We have like 80,000 in cash. Like that, you can't live on $80,000 cash for very long. Not on the run.
Not on the run.
So I get plastic surgery. I get a nose job. I get I get 2 hair transplants. I get a facelift, liposuction. I get my teeth done. And we go and we rent a house from a guy named Michael Shanahan. And I make a fake ID. I assume Michael Shanahan's name. And keep in mind, by this point, I'm going into the local DMV and I just make a birth certificate, or I'd order your birth certificate, but and I'd order your social security card, whatever. And I go and I just get them to issue me an ID in your name.
Right.
Provided you didn't have an ID there, or I would make an ID. So I open up a few bank accounts. I go downtown, I look at the title to his house.
Yeah.
He had 3 mortgages on his house. He had like a first mortgage, second mortgage, and a HELOC. I satisfy all those mortgages on his house. I create what's called the satisfaction of mortgage. It's a 1-page document and it has to be notarized. I make 3 of those and I record those, and his mortgages disappear. And then, so now I'm living in his house, roughly a $200,000 house that I'm living in the name of Michael Shanahan that he's owned for 10 years. And I'm Michael Shanahan.
Yeah.
I call 3 what are called hard money lenders. 3 hard money lenders, which are just guys that lend money on the equity in someone's house. They lend about 65% of the value of the house.
Wow.
I call 3 of them. They show up at different times. Like one guy shows up at 10 in the morning. One guy shows up at 1. One guy shows up at 4.
Yeah.
They all look at the property. They say it's worth about 200,000. They say, well, I'm trying to borrow about 150,000. Each one of them says, yeah, I'll lend you 150. I then close each one of those loans at different title companies so that they don't figure out doing this at the same time. I end up getting roughly 400 after closing costs and everything. It's about 400,000. I get about $400,000. I deposit that money into multiple bank accounts. I pull that money out in cash.
Yeah.
I then take off. A few weeks later, the Secret Service figures it out, and the Secret Service comes in, explains to Michael Shanahan what happened. And I keep in mind, I'm telling you this one. I also did it. We also did it in Tallahassee. We did it in different places, right? Like we did it in Douglasville. We did it in, but this is the one that kind of sparked the whole thing. So they come in, they notify all these people, this is what's happened. And then I'm gone. And I go to Charlotte, North Carolina, and, we buy a couple of vehicles, move into a nice condo in downtown, and the money's already starting to, we go on a few vacations and the money's starting to deplete. So then by this point, I'm actually surveying homeless people to get their information.
Interesting.
I'm taking a survey form and just going around to homeless people. I make a little badge that says statistical surveyor. I make a little form called the Federal Statistical Survey form, which I got an enhancement for. And I would walk around and say, hey, I'd try and find a white guy that was roughly in his mid 30s, which is how old I was at the time. I'm 55 now. And I would walk up these guys and I'd say, hey, you take a survey real quick. It pays $20 cash right now. And they go, yeah, $20.
Yeah, hell yeah.
Right. And I say, yeah, we're just trying to determine where we place our next homeless facility. Are you homeless? And they'd be like, yeah, I'm homeless. I'd be like, okay, cool. And they'd give me all this information. So then I'd go online. I'd order a copy of their birth certificate, their social security card, where I'd register to vote as that person. I would order a copy of their high school transcript, a certified copy of their high school transcript, maybe order a couple credit cards in their name, and I get all this information back. Take that information. I'd write up a lease saying I'd lived in the city for a month or two.
Yeah.
And then go into the local DMV. I'd say, man, I just moved here. I'm from Tennessee, wherever this guy was from. He's from Alabama, wherever. I said, this guy guy drive to like Florida. Yeah, I just moved here from Florida. Been here a month, lost my ID. I need to get an ID or driver's license, whatever. And they go, yeah. I need see your birth certificate. I got my birth certificate. Got my social security card. Got my. Matter of fact, I already registered to vote. Here's my registration vote. Oh, by the way, here's my lease.
Yeah. So brilliant.
No problem. Go stand over there. Pay my $30-$40, whatever it was. Take a picture. Got a driver's license. Now I can go open up bank accounts in this guy's name. I buy a car in his name, because sometimes it was an ID, sometimes it was a driver's license, right? So some of these guys' driver's licenses would be suspended. I'd have to pay to reinstate their driver's license. They'd owe $1,000 or $400, or they'd just be suspended, or they'd be not suspended, but they would just be they'd expire, and I'd have to go. Sometimes I have to go take the test. Can't tell you how many tests I've taken.
That's hilarious.
then I go get a car in their name. I get an apartment in their name, whatever. So I'm doing this. I set myself up as Charlotte, and then I go to Columbia, South Carolina. I buy a couple of houses there as a name of a guy I met in Vegas. His name was Gary Sullivan. So I go in Gary Sullivan. I go to go and buy a couple of houses there. I then satisfy the loans on those houses. Jeez. And I borrow $1.3 million on those houses.
Jeez.
I deposit that money into the bank. Start pulling that money out. I get about $600,000-$700,000 out. I get caught in a bank one time. The police are convinced that, the bank, which was Wachovia Bank, is telling the police officer, this guy's running a scam. This is a fraud. And I'm sitting there going, I don't understand what he's talking about. He's like, this guy's got 3 loans on this property. I actually had 6. He only caught 3. And I'm like, I don't know what he's talking about. I haven't done anything wrong. I came in the bank. I applied for a mortgage. They told me to go to this other company to get a second mortgage. And then they told me this woman said she had a friend, she could get me a HELOC. What's the problem? Like, that's perfectly reasonable. And he's like, well, that's not what he's saying. And I was like, okay, I don't know what to tell you. And while I'm talking with the cop and I'm trying to convince the cop that I haven't done anything wrong, the guy from Wachovia says, it's a scam. He's bullshitting you. It's a scam. Look at his ID. His ID starts with 000. In South Carolina, their IDs start with 000. So when he says this to the cop,
how perfect for you.
He says, it's a fake ID. It starts with 000. And the cop says, no, our IDs start with 00. And I just ran this guy through NCIC.
Yeah.
And his name is Gary Sullivan. His photo comes up. This is Gary Sullivan. So it made him sound like he was wrong.
Yeah, beautiful.
My identification, my identity is not in question. Yeah. And now you're saying that's not even him, and now you look like a fool.
Yeah, perfect.
He's like, look, I'll take him downtown. I'm gonna have a fill out a police report, and I'll get back with you. Hangs up. I follow him downtown, fill out a police report. He lets me go.
Yeah, perfect.
Go to a couple more banks, pull out some more money, and I take off. At this point, we relocate immediately because I know the cops will. I know that they're going to
figure it out.
So we relocate to Houston, Texas. Me and the girl. By this point, she's driving me nuts. She's insane. Yeah. She's bipolar. Yeah. She's screaming all the time. She's having meltdowns. She's had the cops called twice.
Oh my God.
Luckily, I left both times. Like she's screaming and hollering, and I just leave. And when they show up, they were like, "You understand that if we show up for a domestic violence and 2 people are here, somebody goes to prison. Somebody's going to jail."
Yeah.
So we're both wanted. Luckily, both times I left. Like she's screaming. It's 2:00 in the morning. Jesus. You don't love me. I've ruined my life over you. I'm like, I let you come, but I didn't ask you to come. Like you begged to come.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, I get it.
We go to Houston. We get into an argument. We have like $500,000 or $600,000. She gives me $100,000 and I leave. I leave her with $500,000. You know, it's an argument. I know it was an argument. People were like, "Why didn't you just take the money?" Well, it was just because I could take the $100,000. I'll make more money, and she couldn't.
Yeah.
You know, so I leave. She ended up getting caught like a year later. She ended up telling her mother, who kind of basically telling her mother where she was, and her mother tells the authorities, and they come and arrest her.
Of course they did.
So I go to Nashville, Tennessee. I interview a couple homeless guys. So now I've got like 4 or 5 passports. I've had like, by the way, I've had like 22 passports. I would say roughly about 2 dozen passports I've had. It's not real quite 2 dozen, but whatever. So, and these are all issued by the State Department. Like I might have had 27 driver's licenses issued by 7 different states.
That's amazing.
So, I mean, I've had over 50 identities, but
can people get away with that today?
Absolutely.
You know, they can still do it, huh?
Yeah, nothing's changed. So what happens is I go to Nashville. I screw around for, a couple months. I get bored. I start buying houses. I start renovating the houses, and then I start refinancing the houses. I borrow like $3.5 to $4.5 million there. And I was there for about 18 months. And then I find out that there's a program called a Dateline that was going to come out on me. And so I at that point I was going to go to Australia.
Yeah.
And as we're pulling money out of the bank, I'm pulling money out of the bank, and then I'm putting money into another bank, like open a corporation in another person's name,
right.
And another fake identity I have, and I'm putting money in that bank account. So that, because if you went to Australia at that point, if you showed up with like $200,000 and a business plan, they would make you a permanent resident alien.
Yeah.
You filled out the paperwork. You did not have to give them your fingerprints.
I didn't know that part of it, but I was aware of the monetary part of it.
Well, if you want to become a resident, you have to fit. Then you need you do your fingerprints. You need an FBI check. But just to go there and open a business, I'm just a resident alien. I can't vote. I can't take a driver. I can't take a job. All I can do is go there and hire Aussies. So they're a little less lax. They're a little lax there.
I like it.
So, well, it would have been great, but I didn't make it. So we're pulling out money, and my girlfriend ends up confiding, another girlfriend. I was dating somebody else at this point. She ends up confiding in a friend of hers what's happening. That girl calls the Secret Service. Secret Service comes and arrests me.
Jesus.
That's it. I go to prison.
Jesus. Yeah. We're on our way.
That's it. Go to prison. I plead guilty. I get caught. I'm screwed.
Yeah.
I've got everybody and their mothers ready to line up and testify against me.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. The whole neighborhood comes out.
I plead guilty, and I'm willing to cooperate, but everybody's already cooperated against me.
Yeah, of course.
So I just plead guilty. I get 26 years.
Jesus.
There's nothing
Jesus.
nothing I can do about it.
Now this is Fed time, right? Not state time. So you're not getting day for day. You're getting 85% time.
85%, yeah. So I'm going to do 23 years on 26. It was 26 years and a half, right? Well, 26 years and 4 months. So I'm going to do 23.
Yeah. That's a minute.
I would be, if I with good time, I would have been 60 when I got out.
Yeah. Wow.
So I'm still in prison, really, right? I had five more years of prison.
Yeah.
What ends up happening is I go to prison. Prior to being sentenced, the government asked me to be interviewed by Dateline. They said it would help me. They would consider it substantial assistance.
Yeah.
So, okay, I'm interviewed by Dateline. They'd already done a 1 hour special. By the
Did you
time
get that in writing?
You never get anything in writing. You don't get that in writing.
Yeah.
So,
I just wanted the audience to be aware of that, Matt. That's
yeah.
that out there.
I've only met one person that ever got anything in writing ever, and it was actually from Robert Mueller when he was a U.S. attorney. He actually gave a buddy of mine in writing, if you just talk with me.
I've known a lot of high-level criminals, brother, and I've never known anybody to get any of that in writing ever.
Right. And you can always tell the guys that don't know what they're talking about. They're always like, yo, bro, you should have got that. I would have got it in writing. No, you wouldn't.
No,
you wouldn't have got it in writing. Well, then I wouldn't have done it. Well, then you'd have just done your 26 years.
Yeah.
That's what they tell you. My lawyer's like, okay, then just do the 26.
Yeah, time to hit the law library in the penitentiary, brother. Time to go to work.
You're like,
yeah.
They're like, you either do it and hope for the best, or you tell them to go fuck themselves, and you get nothing. At least you have a chance.
So did you do Dateline? Did you do it?
Of course, I did Dateline, and I did Dateline, and they had told me they were going to consider substantial assistance.
Of course.
So I go to sentencing, and my lawyer says, "Are you going to file what's called a 5K1 for his substantial assistance?" And they said, "Yeah, we thought about it and we considered it, but it's just not enough." And of course, Mom, like, what they said, they'd consider substantial assistance. They did consider it, and it's not enough.
Yeah.
I get 26 years. I go to prison. About 3 years later, a TV show called American Greed comes out.
Yeah, I've seen the show.
Yeah, they want me to be interviewed again by American Greed. And of course, I'm like, well, they didn't give me anything last time. And my lawyer's like, yeah, they swear they're going to give you something this time.
Yeah. Well, here we go.
Okay, I do the American Greed interview. Comes out. Prosecutor says, it's just not enough.
Yeah.
So then another year or so goes by, and a guy contacts me. By this point, the Dodd-Frank Act has been made law, and
explain the act to the audience.
So the Dodd-Frank Act is part of the act that it was part of, like the TARP proceeds where they gave the banks, they bailed out the banks. Well, then there was a sweeping act that went through Congress that said from now on, all mortgage brokers, all banks have to be regulated in a certain way. They can't do certain things. They made it illegal to do certain things. And they said all these guys that are mortgage brokers and loan officers, they have to all take a certain amount of continuing education and be licensed. Okay. So they had to take 9, or is it 12? I think I don't know, whatever. It's roughly 10 hours of continuing education courses every year.
So annual workshops.
Right. So 3 hours of that is on ethics and fraud. So I was contacted by one of these companies that does this for the government. And they said, we want to help us write a course on your crime.
Interesting.
So they go to the government, and the government says, if Mr. Cox will do this, we will consider it substantial assistance. Okay. So I write 8,500 words. They use the course. We go to the government and say, hey, we definitely interested. We did everything you said. We're interested in getting a reduction. And the government says, yeah, it's just not enough.
Yeah.
By this point, we have so many emails back and forth that if I can get myself in front of the judge, it's going to make the government look bad.
Yeah.
The government is never interested in looking bad. And
the judges, brother, are always interested in looking at that type of information. If you've got all that assimilated and they see that you're being jockeyed every single time you got bait dangled in your face, and they have a pattern and a repetition of that kind of thing. I've known high-level international narcotraficantes that have used a similar defense for sentence reduction. So that's kind of where you're going with that, correct?
Right. Yeah. You know, the judge is like, they're like, you know, they don't think that's cool.
No,
like they're like,
don't.
look, this guy's a scumbag. He's a scumbag, you know, criminal. And I get it.
But he did what he said he would do.
Right. But you guys are now jerking him around.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what you're doing. Yeah. So
good attorney.
I file a 2255 and the judge, we're going back and forth. And then the government finally says, okay, we'll reduce this sentence.
Yeah.
So I get a reduction of 7 years off my sentence.
Well, that's a bite. You started.
All right. As soon as I get back, keep in mind now, I'm a guy in a low, I wasn't a medium. I got moved to a low. I'm in a low security prison, but I'm walking around. I just got moved back to court and I come back.
Yeah.
And my sentence has been reduced. So everybody knows you're a snitch.
Yeah, you're a rat. Yeah,
right, you're right.
Yeah, automatically.
You know, luckily it is a low.
Yeah, yeah.
So they might
very luckily.
Yeah, they might talk shit, but they're talking shit behind your back.
Well, of course, like they don't want to get put into medium or medium high, bro. They're not going to give that up.
So I'm walking around, and then, you know, once you know people, right, you get to know somebody.
Yeah.
You start to get to know their case a little bit. You start to realize, like, that's not, something's wrong. Like, most people have cooperated. Lots of these guys have, you always just say that like 90% of these guys have cooperated, but 100% of them are lying about it.
Yeah, they're in a low facility, brother. If they've got any kind of crime behind them at all, you know damn good and well they cooperated or got their points worked down like you did.
Well, so what happens is I'm walking around the compound with a guy named Ron Wilson. Ron Wilson is a Ponzi scheme guy. He has stolen. His Ponzi scheme was like $102 million, but I think there was $57 million in loss.
Jeez.
And he was taking money from pension funds and churches and investing the money. Yeah. But it's a Ponzi scheme.
Yeah, allegedly.
So he's not investing the money, he's spending the money.
Of course he is.
So, and he's currently, he got 19 and a half years and he was cooperating. At that time, he was cooperating against his co-defendants. So we're walking around and he's complaining to me saying that the government's not going to reduce his sentence. And I'm like, well, you're cooperating. It's going to be, you know, he confides in me.
Yeah, of course.
Of course he can confide in me. He knows I just got back from, you know what I'm saying? I'm not judging you, Ron.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Obviously you're cooperating too. So I'm going to tell you my story.
Right. So, and we had been friendly anyway. We're both con men, right?
Yeah,
so
of course,
you know, you kind of congregate with, you know, like all the smugglers and drug dealers and stuff.
Yeah, we did.
Right.
We did.
All the mafia guys, even if they're from different families, they all eat together.
Yeah.
So, you know, we're walking around. He's telling me this. He keeps complaining about it. And I'm like, you know, why do you keep saying this? Like they'll reduce your sentence. You're cooperating. He's like, you don't understand. They think I've hidden Ponzi scheme money. And I'm like, okay, well, you know, you didn't. So they can't withhold cooperation because of that. And if worst case scenarios, we'll file a 2255.
Yeah.
Like I just did.
Yeah.
Yeah. You don't understand. Yeah. Okay.
As you've just come back from court doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Months go by and we're walking the track and he says this again. He mentions it again. I go, well, I don't know why you keep saying that. And he goes, can I trust you? And I looked at him and I went, probably not.
Of course you can. No.
And I went, probably not. And he goes, he said, I did hide some Ponzi scheme money. And I really, and he says, yeah.
In the prison to an inmate. Yeah.
Who desperately wants to get out of prison, by the way.
Damn right.
And I made no qualms about it. Like guys would be like, yo, Cox, how much time you got? Yeah. And I go, well, man, I got 26 years, but somebody could fuck up and tell me where there's a dead body. I could be out of here tomorrow.
Yeah, exactly.
And they'd go, oh man, that's how it is. I go, that's exactly how it is. Like, we're not friends, bro.
Yeah.
I don't care if I ever see you guys again. Yeah. And they go, oh man, that's fucked up. And, you know, they walk away and everything knowing like, come on, man, I'm just saying what you're thinking.
Yeah. Oh. Yeah, exactly.
So Ron says this to me and he tells me that his wife he gave his wife $150,000 and he gave his brother, he's not much, 20, 30,000 he's holding for me. I said, oh, okay. And that was it. I shrug it off. I don't do anything with the information because I remember thinking that's that's nothing.
Yeah.
And keep in mind that his brother and wife have already told the government they do not have any money.
Yeah.
So they're not going to go in if the government says, "Are you sure?"
Yeah. Yeah.
They're not going to say, "Oh, you got me." Yeah. So okay, I don't say anything. Keep in mind, I just came back from court.
Yeah.
While I was locked up, I wrote a memoir, unpublished, and I was in the middle of writing guys' stories.
Yeah. Interesting.
So I'm writing true crime stories. I just written mine, and I wanted to update my story because when I had ended the story, I have 26 years. I just got 7 years knocked off.
Yeah.
So I thought, oh, I'm gonna update it.
Yeah.
So I wanted a copy of my transcript. So I'd asked my lawyer to send me the transcript. She said she would. She never did. So I called her and I said, "Hey, you never sent me the transcript." She's like, "Oh gosh, Matt, I'm so sorry. I forgot. I'll do it right now." Okay. Yeah. And I go, "Okay, well, all right. Okay, well, let me know how much it costs. I'll have somebody send you a check." And she goes, "Well, what's going on?" So what do you mean what's going on? She goes, "How's it going in there? Anything happening?" And I went, "Like what?"
Are you hearing anything? Yeah.
Well, the woman, the whole time she represented me, never wanted to talk to me.
Yeah.
Was shocked she answered the phone this time.
How interesting.
So it was just really weird. And she said, yeah, anything happening? I went, "No." And she goes, "Okay." And I went, "Hey, wait a minute." I said, "Listen to this.
Yeah.
You know, this guy told me the other day." So I tell her the guy's name. She looks him up. She goes, "Oh, wow, this is a bad guy.
Yeah. Yeah.
This guy's all over the newspaper."
Yeah.
This was a big deal. Largest Ponzi scheme in South Carolina history at the time.
Yeah.
I said, "Okay." Keep in mind the conveyance that he was using to invest was silver and gold. So that's what people think they're investing in. And he was a legitimate golden or precious metals, whatever, investor, trader, whatever you call those.
Trader.
He just got to a point where he's like, people are giving me $50,000, $100,000, $200,000 to buy gold and trade for them. They never asked to see the gold. They don't know that I'm doing anything. And that's when he starts running the Ponzi scheme. So what happens is she checks. She says, "I'll get back with you." I said, "Okay." A week later, some guard comes up to me and goes, "Cox, come here." And I go, "What's up?" He goes, "On the move, when they make the move that, they have the different moves, he goes, "The next move, you got to go to SIS." And I thought, no big deal, because I've been ordering guys Freedom of Information Acts, right?
Right.
And every once in a while, they would catch it in the mailroom, and they would call me in and say, "Hey, here's your, this got caught. You ordered a Freedom of Information Act from this guy," and they'd give it to me.
Yeah.
And so I go there, and this time the guy's like, "Come on in." And I'm like, "Okay." He goes, "Sir, sit down." I'm like, "All right, what's up?" Like usually they just hand it to me.
Yeah.
He says, "Hold on a second." He picks up the phone and calls somebody, and he hands me the phone. He's got to talk to this guy. I go, "Okay." And the guy says, "Hey, this is Agent
Secret Service."
Yeah, last name was Griffin. It was like something Griffin. Special Agent Griffin with the Secret Service. And he said, "I understand, where there's Ponzi scheme money hidden." I was like, whoa. I want something in writing.
Yeah, yeah.
He said, "I'll get you something in the writing." So I swap it, get his email address. Takes about a month or so for him to get me something in writing. And all it says is, "We'll consider it substantial assistance if he recoups any money, significant amount of money, or helps us get an indictment." Okay. So I'm like, "Look, here's what I know." I told him what I know. He says, "Okay." Then he says, "Hey, can you find out, ask Wilson this, see about this?" And I'm like, "Okay, I'll see if I can add." So then they start asking me questions. So I'm in prison asking this guy questions.
Yeah.
And, that goes on for a few months. And then they eventually set up his wife and his brother to come in. So when they come in, they ask the wife, "Do you have any Ponzi scheme money?" She says, "Absolutely not."
Yeah.
She leaves. Okay. So the brother comes in the next day with his lawyer. He walks in and he drops $150,000 in cash on the table.
Yeah.
Remember, Wilson had told me it was only
20. Yeah.
25.
Yeah.
And an hour later, the wife comes in with her lawyer and says, "I lied yesterday. I do have money." Drops $350,000 and precious metals.
Wow.
Now
That's significant.
I think it's significant.
It is. It is.
So, they re-indict Wilson. They indict the wife and the brother.
Jesus.
I know stuff's going on because they text me and explain they came in. You're going to hear some shit here. The next weeks go by and I'm waiting.
Yeah.
And then they tell me, look, Wilson's about to get some bad news in the next day or two. So one day I'm walking across the compound and I hear Wilson go, Cox. Of course, I'm thinking, I don't know what he knows.
Yeah.
I don't want him to fucking figure this out. And I walk up to him. I'm like, hey, what's up? Like, I'm a little cautious. I'm like, what's going on? He's like, they indicted me. I'm like, what?
Yeah.
What happened? And he tells me, yeah, my wife, she gave him the money and this and that. I'm like, no. He's like, yeah.
Yeah.
And he says, yeah, they turned in $500,000. And I went, $500,000? I thought you said it was like 100,000. And he goes, well, I couldn't trust you. I didn't know if I could trust you. And I went, Ron.
Yeah. It's me, bro.
We're kindred spirits.
Yeah. We walked the yard together.
So he's like, yeah, they re-indicted me. I'm going to have to go back to, whatever. Okay, cool. So 2 weeks later, he's on the call out. They call him back. He gets put on a bus and moved. His wife they get like 100 or 50 hours community service and get like a year probation for obstruction of justice.
And so gave up all the money.
Yeah, they
and gave up the money.
Yeah, they've got nothing. But I mean, they got what? They got a year probation. They got nothing. Yeah. Wilson was sentenced to 6 more months, so he went from 19 and a half years to 20 years. What's funny about that is that about 4 years later, COVID hit and he got let out of jail.
Wow.
So he had 20 years and he got out of jail after like
amazing.
8. Yeah. He's home right now.
Go figure.
So as soon as this hits, so I, of course, go back to the government. We go back to the government. Hey, cut my sentence. And they go, what are you talking about? I don't even know what you're talking about. So we have to file another 2255. We go back to the judge. They tell the judge, Your Honor, we don't know what he's talking about. They didn't know that the Secret Service agent was going to email me a copy of the letter that they had agreed to. They told him, they thought he was telling me. They didn't realize I sent it. So we send that to the judge in a motion, right? We said, hey, what about this? And they suddenly go, well, we'd like to offer Mr. Cox a reduction. So they give me another 5 years off.
So we've knocked off 12 years now.
Yes.
Yeah.
By the time that happens, I have like a year and a half left.
Yeah. Happy days, brother.
Right. So by the time I get out, I go to a halfway house. I've done just shy of 13 years.
Yeah. Wow.
And I get 7 months at the halfway house and don't know what I'm doing. Don't know anything about, never seen an iPhone. I don't know anything, but I do know I wrote a bunch of true crime stories. And so everybody the last year or two before I got out, everybody was telling me like, you need to do a true crime podcast.
Yeah. Yeah.
I didn't know what a podcast was. Never seen a podcast. Don't know what that is. Never been on YouTube. Had never been on Facebook. I think my girlfriend had it. So I get out and I end up figuring out what YouTube is and what a podcast is. And I go do a podcast with someone. Someone says, I call it this guy that had a podcast he had a YouTube channel. And I explained to him, hey, this is what I want to do. And he answers a bunch of questions. He goes, why don't you come on my podcast, see if anybody's interested in your story?
Yeah.
I said, okay. So I go on his podcast. He did answer all my questions. And that podcast gets like over 1 million views.
Wow.
I think it's got
That's
like
amazing.
It's got like 1.3 now or something. It took like 6 months or 4 or 5 months for it to get the million. It slows down.
Yeah.
Then I went on Patrick Bet-David's podcast. That's at like 1.4. I went on Vlad. Vlad's got a cumulative of over 1 million and change.
Yeah.
Went on Soft White Unbelly. That's got like 1.4.
You were on the Connect too, weren't you? John Mitchell.
Yeah, we actually shot that here at my studio.
Oh, that's so cool. Yeah, I flew to LA and I was on his show. Good show.
And so then I started eventually I started a podcast, and I've been doing the YouTube podcast thing ever since then.
Yeah, you know, we're getting ready to wrap up here. So I want to say to the audience also, with regard to this interview, I've been on his show, and I really deeply encourage you to follow Matt's programs, man. He has absolutely amazing guests on there. You know, I just got to put that out there, Matt, because I absolutely love your show. I have been watching it. I enjoyed being a guest on your show as you are on mine today. I think you're absolutely amazing, and I absolutely love this story. We're not going to lose it, brother. We're going to put this one to get it out there.
Right.
Yeah. Hey, listen, man, go get some sleep. So good to see you, brother, Matt. Nothing but respect.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Okay, folks. Well, that wraps up another episode today. And I'd like to take this moment to thank each and every one of you for taking your time to catch our show. Now, if you like these shows, I would ask that you would please hit like, share, and subscribe. It's so important to us that we get these messages out, and we understand that these are graphic, almost toxic interviews. But, you know, this is the kind of impact that we feel is needed in order to make sure that people understand the significance of the problems that we are confronted within our own country and around the globe. So I'm going to say at this time that I love you all. God bless you all. Hasta luego.